What's cooking?
They think the sky is falling. This is our chance to scare them out.
The sky is falling! It hit me on the head! The sky is falling! The sky is falling!
We all know people like that. The sky is falling. Every little thing turns into a crisis. But what do we do when there's a real crisis? When things are really getting out of hand? Well, that's what we're going to look at today when we look at the 91st Psalm. This is part of our series we're doing called Inaugural Passages. We're looking at some of the Bible verses that presidents-elect had Bibles open to when they took the oath of office. Today, we are looking at Grover Cleveland, President number 22 and 24, and until Donald Trump came along, was the only man to serve 2 non-consecutive terms as president. And we're going to look at how we can get God's protection in times of trouble, looking here at the 91st Psalm, which some of it might be familiar to some of you, especially those of you who sing some of the Psalms at devotionals. So get your Bibles, open up to the 91st Psalm. Don't forget to hit that subscribe bar and then the notification bell when it comes up, so you can be notified whenever content's added to the channel. And as usual, remember to comment on these videos, like them, share them, give them a thumbs up. All set? All right, the 91st Psalm. And remember, if you're not careful, you might just learn something before we're done. So let's get started. Oh, and I wouldn't worry too much about the sky falling. We're indoors here. Well, good to see everyone this morning. Thankful for everybody who braved the cold to come out and the weather conditions that we're experiencing. And it's apparently going to get worse before it gets better. The highs are going to be down in the single digits this coming week, and the lows are going down below 0. So this morning, we're continuing our series that we started a few weeks ago on inaugural passages. These are just simply passages that presidents-elect had their Bibles open to when they took the oath of office. Now, not all the presidents had their Bibles open. Some were closed. Some didn't even use Bibles. John Adams took his oath on a law book because he said, I'm taking an oath to the Constitution, not to a deity or to a particular religious sect. When William McKinley was assassinated, Theodore Roosevelt had no holy book, Bible, or any other kind. He just raised his right hand and took the oath. And so today we're going to look at the second inaugural passage of Grover Cleveland. And until Donald Trump, he was the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. In 1888, Cleveland was voted out of office in favor of Republican Benjamin Harrison, and then he came back in 1892 and won the rematch with Benjamin Harrison, making Benjamin Harrison the first Republican president to lose his re-election bid. But for Democrats, that's not a huge victory because Cleveland was the last Democrat elected until Woodrow Wilson was elected in 1912. And this was also the first time that the party in power lost 2 elections in a row. That didn't happen until 2016. In other words, in this case, you had a Democrat who lost to a Republican who lost to a Democrat again, and then the Democrats lost in 2016, then 2020, the Democrats regained the White House. And there's lots of trivia that goes along with most of these elections anyway. Now, when it comes to, for Illinois folks, there's a name you might recognize who was sworn in for 1 term as vice president, and that was Adlai Stevenson, former congressman, former assistant postmaster general, served as Cleveland's vice president during this particular term. Now, look at Psalm 91, if you have your Bibles open to that, and see that this psalm is dealing with God's protection in times of trouble. Now, we all have trouble in life. We all have times when we're seeking God's protection, God's guidance. And if you're going to be nominated for any position of leadership, particularly the head of state of what was then an up-and-coming world power, in the United States wasn't quite the superpower that it is now, but you're definitely going to need guidance. You're definitely going to need God's protection because you're going to have troubles. No matter what decision you make, somebody is not going to like it. And that's what we're going to look at today. We'll look at the 12th through the 16th verse. We're also going to look at the rest of the psalm too. And see, this psalm is anonymous. We don't know who wrote it. But this psalm, we're going to see how we can use the petition God for his protection when we're dealing with times of trouble, with bad times. And the first thing we want to do is to affirm our faith. Look at verse 1. Notice that's what the psalmist is doing. He's affirming, or you could say reaffirming, his faith in God. And this is one that I like, the old King James, the way it words it, that he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust. And in crisis, the first thing we should do is affirm our faith in God. Okay, God's got this. I'm going to trust in God, like Job did. What was Job's response when he got word that his children had died, his crops and farm animals were all dead? Basically he lost everything. What was his response? Well, I came into the world naked. I'm going to leave it that way. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This was a time that he had his trust right where it needed to be. The affirmation of his own faith in God. Of course, his wife had other ideas, curse God and die. But Job stood his ground. He held to his faith. He held onto God, just like Israel needed to hold to the covenant that they had with God. Have you ever, and notice what he says about hiding in the shadow of the Almighty. Now, our children, when we were kids maybe, were afraid of the dark. And at night you're tucking them into bed, and there's a window there, and you can see the trees fluttering, creating those shadows that scare us a lot in the dark. And then maybe a bird comes, like an owl or something, comes and lands on the branch and spreads its wings, and that just scares the kid, and he can, Mommy, Daddy, and they come in, and then you have to, you console them. It's okay, it's just a shadow, it's all right, no monsters, you go back to sleep. But notice he's using a shadow for just the opposite. He's hiding in the shadows. He's hiding in the shadow of the Lord. He's getting closer to God for that safety, for that protection that he is wanting. And God is his refuge, his fortress. Or what's a refuge? That's a place where we go to hide, right? And God is his refuge, his fortress. I was in Europe several years ago, and I asked somebody, what's the difference, because I could never really put my finger on it, but what's the difference between a palace and a castle? I said, because they both are large structures, rich people own them, hundreds of rooms, maybe thousands of rooms, hidden passages and all this sorts of thing. What's the difference? And the answer was pretty simple. And when I thought about it, it's obvious, actually, when you look at it. That is, a castle's fortified. Palaces aren't. And a castle might be where the lord of the manor or the landlord lived. And the villagers and people around him would go to the castle in times of crisis. Maybe an enemy army or bandits, outlaws are sweeping through the area. They'd go there for protection. Maybe in really bad weather or something, they would go there because it was fortified and it could withstand a storm. And there would be places cut in the walls where an archer could be like a marksman to keep an enemy at bay, to defend the castle against attack. So that's the difference. It was more of a fortress. It was a refuge for people to go to. And that is where the villagers, surrounding people would go. This is where the psalmist goes to the Lord as a fortress, as a place of refuge, a place that he could be safe. Because we all want to be safe when we've got times of trouble. His faith is grounded in who God is. And it's grounded in God, who is not a created deity. If you think about it, there's no way man could have thought of the idea of the God of the Bible. Maybe some of the pagan gods, a man could have come up with those ideas. When the ancients a pagan society, they see that big yellow ball in the sky. And they know that at certain times of the year, you got long daylight, you got warm temperatures, the trees have got leaves on it, and there's crops growing, there's grass growing, all these things are growing. But then we hit a period where they start to die off, and then we're in the middle of the winter. It's darker, longer, it's cold, we can't grow anything. You know what? Maybe that ball up there's got something to do with life and where we get life from. Maybe we need to show some homage, some respect, some worship to that. That could be our God. And that's where you see so many societies were some worshipers of the literal sun worshipers. Not just the beach bum who likes to go down to the Gulf Coast in the summer on the weekends and on holidays and hang out on the beach and that sort of thing, but literal sun worshipers. The Egyptians were Ra, spelled R-A, was their sun god. And they worshiped the sun, and they had that god, and a lot of other deity or societies did too. That's how I theorize anyway, that they became sun worshipers, was associating their growing seasons with it. But the God of the Bible, look how different he is than those pagan gods. He doesn't live on a mountaintop like the Greek gods, Mount Olympus. He did not have other gods pop out of his forehead, like Athena is supposed to have popped out of Zeus's forehead. He spoke things into existence. The God of the Bible did not come down and have affairs with human women. He didn't have wars with other gods like Zeus and some of the others had. He did not, well, he has humans that rebelled against him, but not other deities that rebelled against him, like the Greek gods did, and had wars among themselves. Psalm 91, you notice the promise here applies exclusively to those who draw near to God. He encourages us to draw near to God. He encourages us to seek the Lord as a fortress. He is our strength. And the psalmist wants us to seek after him. The psalmist says that God, in time of crisis, does not move. Those times that we feel separated from God, or we feel like there's a distance between us and God, who moved? Well, it was us. God's not going anywhere. He's there stable. He is in his throne. He is watching over us. He's not the one that moved. It's just like the prodigal son. His father didn't go anywhere. He stayed home at the farm. The prodigal son is the one who went out and wandered and then eventually came home. So we can rest in the security of God and continually draw near to him. That's how we stay secure with God, is continually draw near to him. This should remind us of something that we see in the New Testament with James. James chapter 4, where he tells us there that God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Therefore, submit yourselves to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Then he says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. So there's the key to getting through trouble. I move closer to God. If God's over here, I move this way. I don't go over here. That's just moving me away from God. I've got to move close. God's not going anywhere. He's staying right there. And like the prodigal son, I can wander away, but then come back to God. See, the psalmist is repeating references to God here and revealing who God is with the different words that he uses. The Most High, look at Hebrews, look at the Hebrew there, Elyon, supreme being, the Most High, the Almighty, or Shaddai, as in El Shaddai. He is sufficient for everything we need. The problem is many times we don't go to him like we need to. And then the Lord, we've got the word Yahweh, or Jehovah is how we usually say it in English, faithful God who keeps his commitments, his covenants. And then he says, my God, that's Elohim in the Hebrew, emphasizes the fullness and exceeding greatness of God's power. And I saw a definition years ago that said Elohim defined it as the one who is to be feared. And God should be feared in the sense that we need respect for God, but he also needs to be feared in the sense that we should at times be quaking in our boots and be afraid, sweating, afraid of him. Because remember, he is the one that can send the soul to hell. Actually, we send ourselves there when we don't accept the gift that God offers. But that is part of God's perfect justice. He doesn't do justice the way man thinks it should be done. God has his own way of dealing with perfect justice. And that's another discussion really for another time. But what do we do in a time of crisis? Affirm, reaffirm your faith and your trust. And then in a crisis, do turn to God to help you. You can say you have all the faith in God, but if you're not really turning to God, you're not going to prayer, not going to him. If you're not going to God in prayer, not seeking out counsel, not seeking out the fellowship of other Christians, you're going to have a tough time getting through troubles. If you look at this psalm, you'll see that it is a sort of a testimony of God's protection from someone who's had personal experience with it. Notice what he says, surely he will save you. That's emphatic. How does he know God's going to save? Unless maybe he's been there, done that. Has had to rely on God for safety, for protection. The one and only God identified by those 4 words we just looked at, those 4 different names we just looked at, will deliver anyone who trusts in him. He'll deliver you also. He'll deliver me. We simply just have to trust. We just simply have to put the trust in him. His faithfulness refers to God's nature as true and consistent. God, is the same, or Jesus Christ, same yesterday, same today, same forever. Jehovah is the same way. We like consistency, we humans do. God is consistent. He doesn't change. The covenants have changed from the old to the new, but God himself is still the same. He has never changed. He will save. He will intervene on behalf of us. He did it through the Old Testament. But when his people turned their backs on him and went in a different direction and disobeyed, that's when the trouble started. That's when they really got into trouble, was when they just walked away from God, or drifted away is probably a better way to put it. Got into idolatry. They got away from the law of Moses, and that's what got them into trouble. It'll get us into trouble too. We cannot go around thinking we're so sophisticated that we can disobey God, we can change doctrine, change our beliefs, and get away with it. It's not going to happen. So God protects those who draw near to him. He will save from the foe's trap, from the fatal plagues, from the other things that come our way. He will save. Psalm 91 says God will give cover. He will protect you under the wings of care. He will give us what we need to get through troubles. He will give us what we need to get through trials, the dangers that bring God's protection to believers. There's different kinds of dangers. The psalmist describes several dangers that God gives protection from. And some of these are literal dangers. Some of them are physical dangers, literal dangers. Some of them are spiritual dangers. But the point is that God will protect his people from evil. A lot of times, though, we make some bad choices and we make wrong turns. And we get ourselves into trouble because we're not staying on the path that God wants us to. You can see in the Old Testament how that happened. We're told that if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Christ cleanses us from all sin. 1 John tells us. So we've got to make choices. And sometimes we don't make some very good choices. And when you look at some of the troubles that the Bible mentions specifically, such as snares, this snare of the fowler. A fowler was an occupational name. If you know anybody today named Fowler, they probably descend from somebody who handled birds of prey, hawks and things like that. Would be sent up to get rabbits and small game, and sometimes to get those homing pigeons that were sent with messages back to other troops or back home or whatever. They would be used to take them out. And then there's pestilence. See, both of these indicate trouble that comes to the strong and the weak. And God, remember, the strong and the weak, and God, remember, will bless the farmers with the evil farmer, the non-Christian farmer, just like he blesses the farmer. Jesus used that as an illustration, that the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The farmer over here, who's a Christian and a good, faithful Christian, when it rains, he's going to get the benefit from it. And the non-Christian farmer over on this side of the street is going to get the same benefit. They will both benefit. He's going to probably give thanks to God, or he will give thanks to God. The guy over here is just going to say, well, that's nature and that sort of thing. And he's probably not going to be too terribly thankful. But I believe God is allowing all this to happen to reinforce his faith, but at the same time to try and plant seeds of faith in this guy over here. And this farmer over here then should use that as an opportunity to go and see if he can't present the gospel to this farmer and win a soul for Christ. See, the psalmist says he will cover you. This is assurance of God's protection. He will cover you with his pinions, says the old King James Version. God is going to meet you and carry you and protect you through these times. And if you trust God in the crisis to help you, then God gives us a pledge in a time of crisis. What's his pledge? Well, this psalm closes with an affirmation from the Lord himself, affirming the promises of his covenant. He personally assures us that he will honor and reward the faithful person. And remember, Hebrews says God cannot lie. And Paul told Timothy the same thing. God cannot lie. That's something that is impossible for God to do. Why? Because it's against his nature. God can't do anything against his nature. He cannot sin. He cannot lie. Lying is a sin. God has pledged to deliver from danger and set the righteous person, the godly person, on high, meaning either it'll make him protected and inaccessible, or or exalt him. Give one or the other, maybe a little of both. But God is pledging. He is promising. And he is one who does not break promises. He cannot break a promise. He cannot go back on it. Call upon him and he will answer you, we see in the 15th and 16th verses of this psalm. Special blessings promised to those who cling to the Lord. And when we call on the Lord, he promises to answer us. Now, we always have to remember, the answer may not be what we want. I had this exchange with some atheists once. They were asking about unanswered prayers. And I said, no, sometimes God answers prayers. No. There's no such thing as an unanswered prayer. They all get answered. Sometimes the answer is no. They called that a cop-out answer. And I said, okay, then give it this way. When you're at the grocery store, you're waiting in the checkout, and there's all that impulse stuff, the candy and the gossip magazines, and nowadays they've got charging cords for your phone and that sort of thing. And your kid runs up and grabs the Milky Way bar. Daddy, buy this for me. And you say, no. Put it back. Did your kid make a request? Yeah. Did you give an answer? Yeah. Was it an answer that the kid wanted? No. You said no, right? That's your right as a parent. You don't have to say yes to everything. You go to the boss and say, boss, hey, can I have a raise? Boss says no. You made a request, right? Did you get an answer? Was it the answer you wanted? No. So why is it that when we know that humans are not always going to give us the answers that we want, they're not always going to grant every request we have, why is it we expect God to always say yes, to always grant what we request? And then we say, oh, he didn't answer my prayer, but when I asked for that, when I was praying to get that raise or praying for this or that or the other, God might have said no. Or maybe he's telling you to wait a while. I don't know. You're going to have to figure that one out for yourself. But your prayers will be answered, but not always the answer you want. God will be with us in times of trouble and deliver us. Here again, he may not do it the way we want to or the way we think it should be done, because he's got his own agenda, his own plan. We just have to go along with it and walk in the light as he is in the light. And long life was one of the most coveted blessings in the Old Testament. Even today, we look at people who live long lives as something special. Now, the definition of a long life today is different than then. Until fairly recently, 55 to 60, 65 years was about as long as it got. But now we got more and more people living into their 80s or 90s and even past 100. People are living a lot longer, and that is a coveted blessing, even in New Testament times, is to be able to live a long life and have a fruitful life. Hopefully we can all look back when we get to the end of our lives and say, you know, I've been the best servant I could possibly be for the Lord. And that the Lord will say, well done, good and faithful servant. This is a powerful promise we're looking at here in the 91st Psalm. For believers, that God will give us his protection, that he will shelter us when we are in trouble, when we are afraid, when we are weak. But we just have to accept what he offers us as he has told us to. That is to be immersed, to be baptized into Christ, to have our sins forgiven. We do that by faith. It's not to try and earn salvation. It is out of faithful obedience to what the Lord has told us. And then we continue to walk in the light. And if we stray from it, we have struggles. That's why we're here as a family, to pray for one another. And if you need prayers, if you know what you need to do to become a Christian, to be immersed, you know you're not a Christian, we offer this opportunity for the invitation for you to do that. Now, if you're not comfortable coming down public, that's okay. I get that. I'll talk to you privately. But just make sure you are sure of your salvation, that you know that you are walking in the light before you leave this building. And if there's any way we can help you, if you are subject to that invitation and you wish to respond, now's your opportunity as together we stand and as we sing.